Good evening and welcome everyone to today's ECBA webinar about novel solutions for food production in the light of climate change. My guest today is Stefan Hey, co-founder and CSO at vGreens. Welcome, Stefan, and thanks a lot for taking the time to tell us about your company and your ideas tonight. Stefan has a background in Maize genetics, where he did his PhD at the University of Bonn, followed by a postdoc at the Schnable lab at Iowa State University. And he recently turned entrepreneur and co-founded the vertical farming startup vGreens, with focus on data-driven indoor production of strawberries to address fruit production under increasingly challenging climatic conditions. I'm really looking forward to your talk later, and we'll briefly only introduce the ECBA in a few sentences. So the ECBA stands for European Countries Biologists Association, and we are a forum of national biology organizations, and we do also certify the European Professional Biologist. So our model is to share successful organizational models across European countries and to strengthen the lobby we do not really have as biologists. So a while ago, my boss and president at ECBA, Harm Jaap Smith, he started with the hashtag proud to be a biologist. And because we do lack a proper lobby across the world, I think, compared to other natural sciences. And I think it's more important today than ever that we do organize ourselves in regional level, on a national level, and on an international level. And that's what we're here for, and try to help people. So because as biologists, we also do have responsibilities nowadays. More important than ever, I think. We are sometimes proud but not happy to be a biologist because there is no planet B, and some people on this planet do not seem to understand that. All right, so the Synopsis project tries to help teachers to teach for a more sustainable future for all of our children. And with the Synopsis project, we're setting up the Erasmus Plus School Heads and Teacher Training Academy on teaching for sustainability citizenship. So this is not only education for sustainable development, but also the citizenship term expresses a more broad engagement with a lot of different topics. Here are a few faces of the 10 organizations from 7 European countries that we do form the Synopsis Consortium. And we have this project already since 2023, and it will continue another year from now. If you are a teacher and you are joining us today, please scan this QR code now. I will also share the link in the chat in a few moments, and fill out this survey. It will greatly benefit our project. And with this, I'm already at the end, and we'll hand over to Stefan. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and I'm really looking forward to your talk. Just a few things while Stefan is preparing his slides. We will collect all your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. So please type those in here. And whenever Stefan is asking you a question, use the chat box for your answers. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Very excited to have the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm going to, as said, I'll do this a little bit interactively, so chime in anytime. But first a little bit of a story. When I was at university and at school before, Google Earth just came out, and I was really excited about this. So I was always really interested in the world and different places. And so I spent a lot of time on Google Earth and just zooming in and out of places and just sort of exploring in that area. And one of the things that turned into that struck me, and you realize a pattern when you do this. It almost doesn't matter where you zoom in into the world, and then you find traces of humans. And so, I mean, people talk a lot about invasive species, and one of the invasive species is certainly humans. And I'm just going to give you some examples of what you find when you just spend time on Google Earth. Here's, for example, you zoom into the deep Amazon rainforest, and you see, of course, you see deforestation to make room for agriculture. And the same thing happens in Borneo for palm oil production. And zoom in anywhere and you'll find it. And these are vast areas, like ridiculously vast areas. I once traveled the entire Amazon River by boat, 5,500 kilometers from Belém all the way up to Pucallpa in Peru, and this took like 4 weeks on local boats. So it is a vast area, and just to give you an idea of the scale of this invasion of natural ecosystems. And I'm not sure if anyone knows where that is. Has anyone seen this before on Google Earth, or can say where that is? It's quite near. So this is the Mar del Plástico in southern Spain, and is effectively where our vegetables come from during wintertime. So what you see here is not snow, it's all plastic, where they grow our fruits and vegetables in wintertime under plastic covers. And this is a massive area, and they grow food here a lot. During my postdoc, I spent one entire summer out in western Nebraska, and as you travel west from Iowa, vegetation gets really sparse, and it becomes drier and drier as we go into the Midwest, and then when you look at this from space, you find these center pivot irrigation units everywhere. And western Nebraska has like one of the largest freshwater aquifer, and farmers just pump up that water. And while I was out in western Nebraska, we had a irrigated field and a rain-fed field, and he said he would like to irrigate more, but it's empty. There's no water. And that is by and large because there's so much water being pumped up from this aquifer that all of this fossil water is effectively depleted. And here you can see why. It's baking hot, but if you want to grow crops in regions that don't really support those, then that's what you get. And it'll take hundreds of years for this to replenish if you leave it alone. So it only took decades to deplete it, but it'll take centuries to restore it. Can somebody tell where that is? Any guesses?
Not really. So to all participants, you may use the chat box. There's no wrong answers. You can just guess. We have Saudi Arabia.
Close. It's close. This is the reason why the Aral Lake is empty. Why this is now a desert, why there's no more water. There is the water that comes from Kyrgyzstan, from the Himalayas, is going through a river and feeds that lake. But during the Soviet era, when they gave farmers a lot of equipment, they all started irrigating their cotton fields. It was mainly cotton that was grown there. And in turn, because there's no drain of the lake, so it was always water flows in and then evaporates. But if you massively reduce the inflow of water, well, then obviously the lake disappears over time. And it didn't take long for that to happen. So, and now comes in a vicious cycle. So farmers irrigate their fields and deplete the water. So we are left with a salt pan, and then windstorms, they take that salt and put it on those fields that are nearby. And in order to get rid of the salt, they irrigate more. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We'll see how much longer that works, because at some point the river doesn't carry much more water, and climate change will certainly make sure that it's all glacial water. So also these glaciers are retreating, and sooner or later the water will stop running in this area. And this is also one of the most critical parts that is, especially around all of the talk around climate change, one area that we don't really talk enough about is water in general. And I want to leave you with two numbers. We have about 1/3 of all of our agricultural systems are irrigated systems. The rest is rain-fed. We are already using 2/3 of all freshwater resources on Earth. Now you add in a number of different megatrends. We have all or many areas in the world where we currently do agriculture. We already have significant strain on our natural water resources, and highlighted here in red, which is data from the FAO. We already have significant strain on our water resources. And if you factor in climate change, that's just going to get worse, because more areas will require even more irrigation. It gets hotter, so you need more irrigation. It gets drier, you need more irrigation. So this number, 1/3, will continue to rise as we need more irrigated systems. And that in turn means that the number 2/3 is also going to rise, because we will continue to make more ag-related water withdrawals. Another mega trend is a growing population. It's expected that we'll plateau somewhere around 10 billion people on Earth. The vertical line indicates where we are today, at around 8 billion. So we'll have to feed another 2 billion people, with water resources already being on the edge and some of the fossil water being already depleted. We're running into serious water problems. And now if we take sort of this whole climate change and where the projections are going, and we look at the distribution where agriculture is made today. So this map is a little bit complicated, but I'll try to walk you through this. So we look at the dark green cover. These are mostly boreal or rainforests, where there is not so much agriculture today. And then we have like patches here where there is mostly cropland. Also Central Europe and Central Asia has significant. India, China has significant, and then here around Nigeria and Southwestern Africa. Here the Amazon region, or mostly southern Brazil, and it's certainly starting to invade more and more into the Amazon basin. North America has significant, mostly here around the Midwest and California, and then southern Canada. So these are where most of our food is being produced. Now, when climate change continues, in these regions, it'll be harder and harder to produce food. So we can go north and south to produce more food. Well, in the south, there is not really any land mass, maybe here in Patagonia, even though the soil is not particularly great. So with the current methods that we are using, we'll be mostly looking at two countries feeding the world. That's Canada and Russia. Since these are the places where we can still move north with our food production. So where does it leave us? This was certainly very depressing. So what lots of people are talking about is, well, we need things like organic farming, and we need regenerative agriculture, whatever that means. But if you look at the actual data and you look a little bit more into how these systems actually perform on a holistic level, here, for example, is a meta-analysis where they've looked at all of the externalities that are associated with growing food. And one of the key insights that you have to understand is that we sort of, or at least many people have sort of a romantic relationship with agriculture, but agricultural systems are not ecosystems. They're in competition, always. They're not meant to be ecosystems. So we sort of have to balance ecosystems with agricultural systems and have to see them as competition. And when you look at extensive agriculture and intensive agriculture and take it on a global, holistic level, you often realize that the externalities in organic food productions are far worse than the initial numbers and intuitive thoughts might indicate. So this is just an example from that paper. They've looked at lots of different food production systems. It's just one example of beef production, where you have, the more extensive it is in terms of land use, the higher the greenhouse gas emissions per production unit come. Oftentimes we argue in land use or the greenhouse gas emissions per area, but it's the wrong measure to look at. We need to look at the production unit, because that's ultimately what then feeds the world. And this is not exclusive to beef production. There's a number of, effectively any food production system has to be measured per production unit, because we also need to feed 10 billion people. This is a more recent paper that sort of illustrates how these are in competition and how to look at these on a global level, where they explain the concept of land imports. So a country doesn't use this, doesn't really, or for example, a country doesn't produce food. Take Singapore. Singapore hardly produces any food, but they import food. So in this paper, they sort of break down how they import lands, because other countries then free up the land to produce food, so that that food can be then brought to Singapore. This study focuses mostly on Germany, but is certainly applicable for any country that participates in global trade and where agricultural goods are exchanged. And here's, again, so per unit of land, organic farming often beats conventional farming. But if you take the production unit, the thing reverses. That's true for most things, not only greenhouse gas emissions, but also for things like biodiversity, because we should instead make sure that we release land for ecosystems to thrive and not agricultural systems where we steer which species we want to have in this field, because we always care about the species that we are growing. And one feature of nature is that it recovers if you just leave it alone. One of the most healthy ecosystems we have in the world is Chernobyl, because we left it alone. It has among the highest predator concentration in any place in the world. So, to summarize, our food production at the current rate, or with the current methods, is going to relocate to the north. We have rapid water resources declining, and extensive farming often comes at steep environmental costs. So we need to look at this a little bit more different. Now, where does it leave us? We somehow need to feed 10 billion people, and yeah, all of that was depressing. But let's look at some of the solutions, and first of all, we'll do a little bit of history. Does anybody know who this fella is? He has won the Nobel Peace Prize. And certainly one of my heroes.
There is a guess in the chat. Do you see it?
No.
Norman Borlaug.
That's correct. It's Norman Borlaug. The only agronomist to ever receive a Nobel Peace Prize, and he has done much of his work. So he grew up a poor farmer in Iowa, and he's done most of his work in the Sonora Desert in Mexico, where he's lived most of his life, and he has bred his elite wheat varieties that were war varieties, so they wouldn't fall over through winds, and were stem rust resistant. So they had a resistance gene against a fungal pest that would destroy yields worldwide. So he united both of these traits in wheat, developed that over decades in the Sonora Desert, and then he invited people from all over the world to learn how to grow these crops, send them back to their home countries to then bring these varieties and the new way of growing these crops to the home countries. And he's managed to make sure that many places on Earth became self-sufficient in terms of food production. And I think nobody can say he has fed more people than Norman Borlaug. And his work was effectively started here. And you can sort of see what that did to the global population down the road. Now, Norman Borlaug has done significant improvements in crop yields worldwide, mostly with cereal crops, mostly wheat. But similar things happened with others. So maize has made major improvements as well. And I just want to touch on a few other methods, how we can improve those crop yields even further. This is one of the best papers that I've ever read. Had you asked me the question, is this going to work? I would have said most definitely not. They have effectively engineered an entire pathway to deal with a wasteful process during photosynthesis. Just through bypassing photorespiration. So I don't really want to bore you too much with the details, but essentially they've taken 3 different pathways, the red one, the light blue one, the dark blue one. And they found these in bacteria and engineered them into plants to bypass this energy wasteful process and see if they can improve crop yields just through through a more efficient photosynthesis. And in fact, in field trials, so these were real life conditions in tobacco. In field trials, they've seen a 30% yield increase out in the field under real conditions just by tweaking photosynthesis. And this is something that can be done effectively with any C3 species. So C3 is a way of making photosynthesis. Let's say the more common one, and then there is C4 metabolism, where this method wouldn't be so effective. It only really works in C3, but we still have a large pool of crops where this method could potentially work. But of course, we have to rethink our let's say our attitude towards GMOs, because this does require engineering a pathway, a metabolic pathway from a foreign species. Now, a little history again. This was 1856 when the US Congress passed an act. And they passed the act because of this. Basically, the Guano Act stated that anybody who claims an uninhabited island with a lot of bird poop could claim it, and if they get in trouble, the US Navy would come and support them and defend the island. Because guano at the time was sort of our only way of getting nitrogen fertilizer. That was our source of nitrogen fertilizer for our fields, and so we mined them from these bird poop uninhabited islands, and the US Navy would come and defend them. Until we figured out this. Does somebody know what that is? It guesses?
Not yet.
This fella played a big role in this. So this is Fritz Haber, and he certainly, I mean, he's a character who has probably lots of opinions about, but one thing is arguably among the second, like besides Norman Borlaug, he played a big role in why we can sustain so many people on Earth today, because he effectively figured out how to make this reaction, which is the ammonia synthesis from hydrogen and nitrogen. And this is our source for nitrogen fertilizers. He came a few years early before Norman Borlaug, and Norman Borlaug certainly ran with this process, because all of a sudden we had access to large quantities of nitrogen. So we didn't need the guano anymore. So we didn't really rely on bird poop, which was certainly a finite resource. There's only one problem with the Haber-Bosch synthesis. It's extremely energy intensive. This is how much energy we spend each year on the Haber-Bosch process just to produce ammonia and then turn it into ammonium fertilizers. That is how much that is in terawatt hours, and it's just shy of what Germany uses as primary energy. So that includes all fuel and gas and heating and whatnot. So it's not only electricity. So it's almost on the level of the entire energy consumption of Germany. So it's an enormously energy consuming process. And a few years ago, a group of researchers from UC Davis and partners from Mexico, they found a maize variety somewhere in the Sierra Mitre valley that had sort of this glibber around these brace roots in maize. And they were wondering, like, what is this stuff? Why is the plant doing this? And this is mucilage, which most root tips extrude, but not to these excessive amounts, and certainly unusual to have this above ground. So they looked at what's in this stuff. And they found a bunch of different things, but most importantly, they found a bacterium that manages to feed on those carbohydrates and had the ability to fixate nitrogen from the atmosphere and feed it back to the plant. So this plant effectively has the ability to tap into unlimited nitrogen resource. It's 78% of the atmosphere, and these bacteria can fixate it and make it available to the plant. Now, imagine we take something like this. We take this concept and teach it to other plants through direct targeted edits and bring it into other plants. We can reduce this ridiculously large number because we can teach plants how to do it themselves. This plant is not unique. There's other plants who have figured out how to do this. So, for example, legumes can interact with other bacteria in nodules, but it's just this concept. We can teach this to other plants with, of course, more research, and the group is heavily working on how to transfer this possibility to other plants. So I've just brought you a few examples. There is tons of examples more of really cool things that we observe in nature that we can use. We just need a lot more research that needs to go into this. And most importantly, we need a different mindset on how we think about technologies. And here are a few factors that drive this sort of innovation. We have DNA sequencing has rapidly evolved. We can now sequence genomes in a matter of hours, and the sequencer is a USB stick. So sequencing data is readily available and is dirt cheap. This can really help us learn so much more about the genetic underpinnings of our crops and how we can use these learnings and how we can cross species borders. So DNA sequencing is certainly one of those. And AI is also supporting biology in many different ways. We have now algorithms that predict the exact protein foldings and structure, unlike anything that we've seen before, and which used to be a tedious process with crystallography. Lifetimes can be poured into finding protein structures. And AI can help us figure this stuff out for deep biological insights and also large-scale trait discovery. Because now we also have the computational power to do so. We have so many computation supercomputer clusters that can help us figure this stuff out. Together with robotics and precision agriculture, also all of our machine vision algorithms are becoming so much better, so much more precise, that we can really target large scales at a high precision. And this has in turn led over the last years and probably decades, has continuously driven down the pesticides use. And this is going to continue with these machine vision algorithms that process data in such a ridiculously fast manner. We can drive across a field and target only the species we don't want, only the weeds we can target with herbicides, so that we can significantly reduce pesticide use. now I'll make the switch to our piece of the puzzle, essentially. It is generally also in the realm of intensifying agriculture to make sure that we use less land. So our data-driven farming method is where we want to use algorithms and AI to control agriculture. But we start with a strawberry, so we make a model for strawberries to modulate the environment to exactly what the plant requires while driving down the resource inputs. So we sort of move a little bit away from the genetic engineering part and sort of turn it around and say, okay, here's a plant, it has this genetics, like what do you need? What do you want? And then we supply because we have some level of control. And you can take this to a ridiculous conclusion, and you have sort of a fully enclosed system where you control all environmental parameters, or you can still intensify through going into a greenhouse where we use natural sunlight and control environment to some degree, but not the full control. And depending on which location you look at, one system makes more sense than the other. So for example, a greenhouse somewhere in the Middle East is just not going to happen because it's baking hot, and the heat that you would have in a greenhouse is just enormous. You won't really be growing plants in there. So it depends on the location where we look at what. And just to give you an idea how these may look like. So at the extreme end, we are looking at a fully controlled system where we work all indoors, all with artificial lights, where we control temperature, humidity, etc. But we manage to also get a lot of plants in there. So on a per square meter basis, you increase crop yields to about 500 to 1,000 times compared to growing outside, simply because you have multiple layers of, or you can factor multiple things. So for example, you extend the life, the actual time of a plant being productive to the entire year, where outdoors you produce strawberries for 6 to 8 weeks at a time, and then that plant is sort of waiting until next year. And here you have the entire year, you have production. So that's your first factor. The second factor is the height. And these compound to make up this ridiculously high crop increase, the yield increase per square meter. And you get all of this leveled production so that you can produce demand-based. This facility also includes a nursery where we grow young plants at the same time, so that we also have a continuous plant supply. So now we're entering the mother plant area where we have the next generation come in. And then these are being planted and propagated and then ultimately brought into production. So now that's a lot of technology, and as I said, this makes sense mostly for areas that want to be self-sufficient in food production, but don't really have the climate or the weather to do so. In most places, the reality would look more like this, where we have a vertical system in a greenhouse and we make use of natural light as much as possible and only supplement that light that's not enough. But with this vertical approach in a greenhouse, we still get to double dip on many of the resource inputs that we do. we have some supplemental lights in these as well. But all of the climate control, we get to calculate that on more plants per square meter, because in a greenhouse, it doesn't really matter how many plants are in there if you want to control your climate. If you have a higher number of plants, you can calculate those resource inputs onto more plants. So that's why you still have an improvement of yield per square meter and a reduction of resource inputs. And this, for example, for Europe, this would be the most sensible approach. And yeah, so to the summary, the genetic engineering toolbox is a resource that we should not leave untapped. There is so much creativity that can go in, and your imagination can be endless. And CEA, so controlled environment agriculture, allows places to become self-sufficient for some crops. It doesn't make sense for every crop, but some. And you can produce these locally and year-round. In general, if there's just one thing that I can hammer home, it is that we should stop the division between conventional agriculture and organic agriculture, but we should rather look at agriculture in a holistic manner, that we turn the entire food production more sustainable, and we pick and choose from all sides the best things and incorporate that into our food production systems. There are good things in either system, and we should use all of them. We don't really have the luxury to not use any of the tools, any of the technologies that we can. The problem is so vast, and we have to find solutions so fast that we must take technology from wherever we can get it, and not really doing a step back in how we used to grow food, because it is not going to bring us the results that we need. And that would be my main take-home message. And now I'm happy to discuss some of these probably not always popular opinions.
Hey, all right. Thank you very much, Stefan. I really loved your talk, and yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to the questions now in the Q&A, and maybe until we have the first few questions, I took a few notes, of course, because I do have a lot of questions. I mean, basically, it's going back to the beginning of your talk, and now you made the loop perfect by again commenting this in the very end about organic food production, and you know, the mindset we have in Europe. Because I mean, I heard a lot of talks about NGTs, so the new technologies we could use. The use of GMOs in Europe and across the world, people are not really so hesitant, but we are in Europe. So I always wondered, is this, you know, are we Europeans just ignorant to the problems we are facing, or is this, how do you see that?
It is certainly, so Europeans should be ashamed of themselves trying to impose the ban of GMOs onto other countries. Most people in Europe have never felt the physical sensation of hunger, and I highly recommend you read the book of Norman Borlaug, who had very little patience for this elitist talk. So they sit on the leather couches and don't really know how it feels. So if you want to push non-GMO to poor communities who are starving, simply because you have an ideology in mind, you should be ashamed of yourself if you're trying to impose such ideologies, because these people, they depend on it. They depend on secure crops, on having enough food output. I know that this problem of food production is more than just production. We also have huge challenges in terms of food waste and food distribution. But none of these alone, tackling none of these alone will do the trick. We need to work on all ends. We need to work on the production, we need to work on the distribution, and we need to work on food waste.
All right, thanks. I think the problem you mentioned is especially pronounced in Africa, where Europeans basically make the support dependent on the ideology, if I recall this correctly. And maybe it's good just to have this picture. I heard this in another talk once. You know, a Kenyan farmer, he has 4 kids, and he just has a specific piece of land, yeah. And now, you know, his 4 kids, they either divide the fields, or 3 need to find another job, right? And if we cannot find a way to intensify this use, you know, people need to go away, people need to leave their homes, and people do not have something to eat. And I think this is something that really clicked in my mind at some point, because, you know, we always think about, you know, the farmer over there just growing some potatoes in my, you know, Germany. So, and where does all this food come from? And I think we need to change that. And coming back to your talk about CRISPR-Cas, the methods we have at hand, but we are not using, it's basically the same. The US and China, they're having a lot of patents pending. You know, they're using the technology, and it's not like it's not coming to us. You know, we prohibit this innovation for a while longer, and I don't know how we can change this. But again, this is just a mindset problem in Europe, is it?
Yeah, I can only agree. I can only agree. And there's like a bunch of examples. So I mean, the most common one that probably everybody has heard is golden rice, where children don't need to go blind because of vitamin A deficiency, but through all of this lobbying, golden rice is not used, even though it could alleviate that problem of children going blind. And again, that blood is on Europeans' hands, because they are the ones who pushing this ideology. And I'm curious to see what is going to happen if, I mean, there are various trends when you look at, for example, the Cavendish banana. So the Cavendish banana is the absolute dominant variety that is being produced. Almost exclusively all bananas we have and we find in the supermarkets are Cavendish. And in the 1950s, there used to be a different banana, the Gros Michel, which was the dominant banana. But a fungus, Fusarium oxysporum, tropical race 1 to 3, wiped out the entire banana production worldwide of Gros Michel. It just didn't exist anymore, because these fungal spores, they are extremely durable. They stay in the soil for a very long time. So once a field is infected with Fusarium oxysporum, tropical race 4, it is useless for bananas. And that has led to the disappearance of Gros Michel. Luckily, we found the Cavendish, which was resistant to that. And just a few years later, a new strain of that fungus emerged and infected also Cavendish bananas, and is now spreading worldwide. And the banana production is on the brink of collapse. And now I'm curious to see, are people going to accept a GMO banana if it keeps the bananas in the shelves, or are they going to stop using, or are they going to stop eating bananas? Now, it may not come down to that choice, since there is there is multiple strains of development. So the University of Queensland has developed 2 varieties of Cavendish that are resistant to tropical race 4. So those are ready to use. So those we could use to secure the banana production for the future. But also Chiquita has been working on a strain that has basically been done by let's say classical breeding, which shows initial promising results. So it may not come down to the choice, but I would have been very interested to see, are people going to accept GMOs if it means they get to keep eating bananas?
That's a good one. I'm looking forward to that decision at the shelves. And also just a side note that, you know, most of the people, they don't know what classical breeding also includes, because a lot of the strains, for example, the grapefruit is a very good example for how radiation was used in the, I think, 50s, was it, that people changed through mutagenesis, undirected, you know, thousands of mutations. You need to backcross like 100 times to get rid of all this, to keep the few traits you wanted. And we wouldn't have the pink grapefruit nowadays if people wouldn't have used like big blocks of radiating material on crop fields. So yeah. All right. But coming back, there's a question now. Yeah, because I wanted to come back to vGreens now. And Moritz is actually asking a question. Thanks for the talk. Very interesting stuff. Are there any staple foods or crops which would work for vertical farming? I was under the impression that especially leafy greens and apparently strawberries work very good for that.
Yeah, in theory, you can grow anything in a vertical farm. If you give me €1 billion and 10,000 years of time, I'll grow you a 150-meter redwood tree. The question is, does it make sense to use staple crops? And I would say this: we are a long way away of using vertical farming for staple crops such as wheat, maize, rice, etc., because the energy inputs are, for now, too large to do so, and also the technology that is needed to do so. Staple crops can be stored, so we should just produce enough during the summer and store them for the winter. And make sure that we use technologies that secure our productions. The unit economics for staple crops just don't work out at this current stage. Of course, that depends on how the need is going to be in order to, let's say, secure local production for some countries, but that is more geopolitical discussions and how we want to deal with the fact. And if indeed our food production will come in the future from effectively 2 countries, Russia and Canada, and if we really want to allow that our food depends on 2 countries, that's a geopolitical discussion that might make the need to actually invest so much into local production that we can produce such. However, for staples, there are also alternative ways how we can sort of deal with this fact that the ones we grow today may not be viable in the future, but there is a number of different orphan species that we could potentially domesticate, that are accustomed to dry conditions, that are accustomed to sort of salty conditions. So some good progress has been made with quinoa, which is certainly very, very drought and salt tolerant, which could be further improved to really allow mechanization and would then in turn be a suitable crop for the future in places where today we grow wheat, barley, and maize. The question is, are humans going to adapt to a different diet? I don't know. I guess the need will tell.
All right. My first question to vGreens would have gone in a similar direction. So how did you decide on strawberries to be the first species that you wanted to specialize on?
Yeah, so when we started out, we sort of looked around on what the vertical farming market is doing, and we've seen that most companies grow leafy greens, and it absolutely makes sense. It's the natural first step if you want to embark on such an effort. It's the most logical way. I mean, you pop a seed and you germinate it and you wait, and then you have a single point of harvest. You don't really need to deal with all of the problems that come with fruiting crops. So leafy greens are a good and easy start. But we thought at the time, what would be the next evolution step of vertical farming? And then we ended up with fruiting crops so that we grow fruits and vegetables in a vertical farm, and then the strawberry came out as a good starting point. It is a very complicated plant since it responds extremely strong to its environment. So balancing the plant is a major challenge, and then you have a few more challenges that fruiting crops bring, such as you need to also deal with pollination. So you need to bring pollinators into these completely closed farms. You need to make a farm that is so where plants are happy, but also pollinators are happy, so that you can keep them. But it was the natural next step in this technology evolution to deal with fruiting crop, and the strawberry had a number of features which made it the most suitable option. It's a compact plant, so it doesn't really grow big like an apple tree or mango or whatever, which would certainly be much more challenging to go into a vertical farm, and still produces quite a lot of yield for being such a small and compact plant. At the same time, it also has among the most challenging supply chain, since it's a non-climatic fruit. So you have to harvest it when it's ripe, because once it's harvested, it doesn't ripe anymore. So it only goes downhill from there. So this local aspect makes most sense. And everybody knows that strawberries, the shelf lifetime is not very good. Also here, the local aspect of having short supply chains. So harvest to the sale can be and has to be really short, and vertical farming can certainly help with that. If you manage to grow year round, we can sort of remove this need for importing them from Egypt, Morocco, and Spain. In Germany, for example, and I mean, take any country, and you have some way of different countries supplying at different times of the year. So that's why the strawberry was sort of the natural first step, but we see it as a blueprint for other fruiting crops. So it doesn't only have to be strawberries. But, and I've touched on that just now, anything that is trees are unrealistic in such a capex intensive setup. So trees are also going to represent significant challenges. So I don't think we'll be seeing mangoes anytime soon at reasonable prices. Because that's one thing that is important to us, is that it doesn't become like a lifestyle gimmick for rich people. We want this to be accessible to everybody. So we need to make the unit economics work so that everybody can afford these.
All right, thank you. There are a few follow-ups that come to mind. First, speaking as a biologist, how do you, without telling us too many details that are maybe still not ready for the public, but how do you care for pollinators in such a in a factory, let's say? So if you talk about the self-sustaining isolated box, how do you keep them? Do you keep them in there? Do you just let them fly whenever needed? Probably you do. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so the complete indoor certainly represents the biggest challenge since since we use mostly bumblebees. These are, let's say, greenhouse standard. I can go in an online shop and order a bumblebee hive, and then it's being delivered by DHL. So it's really that simple and that established. That's why we use bumblebees. They seem to orient fine in a vertical farm, which is a challenge with pollinators. You need to make sure that they can orient themselves. And the challenge here becomes the vision of these species, that most of them have their vision shifted into shorter wavelengths. So they have strong vision at UVA spectrum. And in our farms, we don't have UVA. Our spectrum goes down to like 400, 405, 410 nanometers. But really the sweet spot lies at 390 nanometers for vision with bumblebees. And what we see is if we don't have sufficient blue in the spectrum, bumblebees don't see, and they don't find their targets. They don't even fly. So those are things that you need to then consider. And other things for bumblebees or pollinators in general, all of your ventilation systems must be accommodated because a bumblebee only has so many horsepower. If it gets too close to a suction pipe, it just is being sucked into the fans, and then it's making an offering.
All right. Okay, and you didn't tell us so much about vGreens, your company itself. I would be interested. I just browsed through the website, of course, before today, and looked at that you already have a quite big team. So at which stage are you with vGreens currently?
Yeah. So we are working on the first commercial projects this year, where we roll out a POC to do this in larger scale. By larger scale, I mean about 1,600 square meters. But ultimately, the trick is having larger farms of several hectares for this to really make sense, to have all of the logistics behind, and also to push the unit economics down so that these become a widely accessible product. The team is fairly interdisciplinary, so it ranges from crop science to mechanical engineers, AI, data scientists, software engineering. Since our core expertise lies in the second automation layer, where we sort of control these farms autonomously, so that the computer essentially decides which parameters to use as set points, and it integrates multiple dimensions of factors. So things like energy availability in the grid is one of those factors, so that when we talk about supplementary light, which uses a lot of energy, we shift that into times when the energy grid has an overabundance of electricity, and that is most of the time when renewable energies are currently in the grid. So when all of the wind and solar pushes into the grid, oftentimes we don't really have the demand and don't know where to put this. And then that software recognizes that and predominantly takes that energy in such times.
Okay. There's one more question in the Q&A function. How does vertical farming compare in energy or financial input per food unit versus conventional farming? And how can you project this calculation in the future?
So in terms of unit economics in larger scale, we are competitive with outdoor production, and the main driver for high prices in outdoor production are the seasonality and labor costs, at least in Western Europe. Those things are, of course, different in other parts of the world. The challenge for outdoor growing is that you have a short window where you can produce, but everybody is producing at the time, and then you typically see around June when prices of strawberries drop. So every farmer produces a lot, but they also don't really get much. And high labor costs add to this problem. Our farms, they make use of the year-round availability of produce and, let's say, more ergonomic farm layouts so that the labor inputs per kilo is lower. And that's how we achieve the price competitive. Now, with energy, it is far more complex. So the energy inputs are high. Since artificial lighting is quite energy consuming, and this is in turn the reason why we work so hard on making sure that we put these energy uses into those times when energy is overabundant and we sort of use predominantly excess energy. When you talk about the complete indoor production, we're looking at about 26 kilowatt hours per kilogram. And if you make that calculation, then there is still a lot of things that need to happen to make that a product. We need to push down the electricity use still much further, and we're working on ways to do that. But I think the key will be the flexibility of electricity to make this a viable product.
Okay, thank you. So maybe one final question. When do we expect the first vGreens strawberries to be in the shelves across Europe or somewhere else?
Whether or not they're going to be labeled as vGreens strawberries remains to be seen, but probably by Q2 next year.
Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe we can have a mailing list for all the people who attended tonight, and you can advertise once more so people can really already taste the strawberries, and it's a bit of taste of a future also for all of us. All right, if there are no more questions, I would think not. So I would thank you again, Stefan, for your time and effort. I think your talk was really, really good. There's a comment in the chat box. We can have pre-orders now.
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, perfect. Do that, Pedro.
You can have some experimental ones.
Yeah, perfect. All right. And yeah, I think your talk was really really informative. Also, I really loved your intro and why we need this. And I think it's a really, really nice success story already, looking at your company today, and hope to read about you in the future. And thanks also for everyone attending. And I hope you have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.